He was recommended to me by Duncan Rhodes, who is the publisher of Nexus magazine. Nexus magazine is one of the two magazines that I've recommended to people ever since I found both of them. One of them was Nexus and the other one is Media Bypass. And later on you will hear one of the contributors to Media Bypass. But Nexus had a conference in Australia in the spring, I think it was March or May, and Duncan Rhodes called from Australia and talked to me for 30 minutes recommending our next speaker and said how he was, he really was of great interest, extreme interest, and I should definitely try to get him. Turned out, here he lives right in the Denver area. So it's a pleasure to introduce Bruce Moen, as your program says, and he will tell you of his work on scientific investigation into the afterlife. I think it'll be a good follow-up to Mr. Brinkley. Will you welcome and bring on Bruce Moen, please?
Now we'll see if my mic is on. Sounds like it is. I'm not sure how I'm going to follow that kind of a lead-in. But I want to start by just explaining to everybody that I'm just an ordinary guy. And I have an engineering background. I'm trained as an engineer. That engineering training made me kind of a skeptical guy. And what I want to do today is to try to let all of you know that the things I've done and the things you might read about in my books, my wife brought these up, so I've got to show them. There, I've done that. There are more of them back on the table. In the early 1990s, I found a place where I could learn to explore the afterlife. I went to this place called the Monroe Institute out in Virginia. Some of you may know about Robert Monroe, out-of-body guy. Well, he's got a place that'll teach you how to explore the afterlife. And I went there. And I learned how to do it. And I came back from that and learned some simple ways. What I want to try to do in the next hour or 15 minutes is to explain to you how easy it is to do. Exploring the afterlife is so easy that the hardest thing to do is believe you're doing it. That's a trickier statement than you realize. It's one I finally realized. I don't have any special psychic gift. I don't have any special talent. I've never been struck by lightning. I've never had a near-death experience. None of that. And yet I know from my own direct experience, having explored this area for quite some years, that the afterlife exists. And afterlife is really kind of a misnomer. There really is no afterlife. There's a place we live here where you can all see me, and there's a place we're living there where you can't all see me while you're here. While you're there, you can. So no near-death experience is required. I can remember when I was probably 5 years old, walking around wondering about things, and there were these three questions I wondered about all the time, from the time I was 5, and I still wonder. The first one was, where was I before I was here? And the second one was, what am I supposed to do while I'm here? And the third one was, where do I go when I leave here? And as a 5-year-old, I wandered around wondering. And my wondering led to knowing. I mean, I'm just this ordinary guy whose curiosity led me to know. And there's no difference between me and anybody in this room in that regard, except that my curiosity already led me there. I'll talk a little bit about this program I went to. It's a program called Lifeline. It's a program in which I got my training wheels. The training wheels are something called retrievals. The premise of Lifeline is that when some people die, for one reason or another, they don't realize they're dead. or the circumstances of their death sort of got their attention and held it there. And for various reasons, these people become what's called stuck in lifeline parlance. And what that means is they're no longer physically living. They're in a place that's essentially a reality of their own making. And they're stuck there. Lots of ways you can get stuck there. Lifeline program was a program in which what I learned to do was to go find a stuck person, get their attention, say, "Excuse me." And early on, I wasn't very tactful about it. My usual approach was, "Excuse me, I know why your husband appears to be ignoring you. I know why when you go over and try to lift him up out of the bed to get his attention, he doesn't do anything but just sort of wake up mumbling. I know why. It's because you're dead." It's a very tactless way to do it. But as my wife will admit, probably I don't have a lot of tact. The Lifeline program was one in which it was built as a program of service here and service there. The service there part was this retrieval stuff, my training wheels. The thing that got me to first begin to explore this afterlife. It's the wrong word, but what can I say? It works for now. So the service there aspect was this idea of finding people who have been stuck after they had died, getting their attention, and helping them move to somewhere where they're no longer isolated, where they can be with other people who can help them. The service here aspect had more to do with how many here know someone who has died? How many here think you will know someone who's going to die eventually? The service here aspect has to do with people who knew me and knew that I was exploring this afterlife stuff would come to me and say, "Gee, my grandma died. You know, would you go check on her?" And I'd go to check on her. I mean, I was still in my training wheel mode. To give you an idea of how some people are stuck, the grandma is one example. This particular grandma, I went to look for as a result of a Saturday morning Bible study I went to for a long, long time with some interesting folks, and we were all talking about one Saturday morning about our image of what the afterlife was like, and everybody there was being either a good Lutheran or a good Catholic because it was a Bible study, and these are people who were like coming into a Lutheran church from other places, and when it got around to me, my stories were a whole lot different than everybody else's. And afterwards, a woman came over and said, "You know, Grandma died, would you go check on her for me?" I said, "Sure." Well, it turned out that Grandma had had Alzheimer's disease. I didn't know this in the beginning. She just said, "Would you check on Grandma?" I laid down, closed my eyes, relaxed, went through this little procedure I go through that I learned. Said this woman's name in my mind, Gertrude Euphemia Weatherwax. There's no way you can forget a name like that, and I had to disguise it in the book, so I've just told a secret. In the next few moments, I'm sort of in the middle of some black void, and there's this old woman sitting on a chair. It's a wooden chair. She's sitting by a kitchen table. And I can tell by looking at her that she hasn't had two thoughts you could call serial in a very long time. Just totally fragmented. And I'm standing there trying to figure out how to approach her because I'm trying to develop tact. And I've realized that at times it's not best to say, "Excuse me, but I know why this is happening. You're dead." And so I'm standing there just trying to think about what I could do to get her attention, what I could do to talk to her. And in this totally disorganized look in her face, she sort of turned and looked at me and saw me for just an instant. At that point, some non-physical friends of mine and one who's physically living sort of came into the scene, and while I was confused about what to do, they just sort of took over. A friend of mine sort of went behind the lady's chair, and these two people dressed up in little old lady bodies. I mean, they looked like they're, I don't know, they were pretending to be in their 90s at least, come walking toward the woman in the chair. And as they walked toward him, I recognized the one nearest me as a as a grandmother of a friend of mine, a dead grandmother I'd worked with before. The other woman I didn't know. These two old ladies are walking toward the one in the chair. And they got about this far away, and the woman who's sitting in the chair turns and says, "Maggie, Maggie, what are you doing here?" At that point, they sort of picked her up, and off they went. Well, it turned out Gertrude had Alzheimer's. She was pretty disorganized for the last 9 months, year of her life. When she died, she carried the habit of that disorganization into her afterlife experience. It was just a mental habit. But it had become so ingrained that she was stuck sitting, as I talked to my friend later who asked me to check on Grandma. In her afterlife experience, she was sitting in a wooden chair, or on a wooden chair in the kitchen, and my friend said, "Well, that's interesting because for the last 9 months of Grandma's life, you could get her up, but you were going to have trouble with Grandma unless you just brought her into the kitchen and sat her down in that chair." So she was stuck from a mental habit. And it turned out, by the way, that Maggie was her mother. And I had no way of knowing this. Her mother's real name was Margaret. This was still early in my training wheels time when I was still pretty skeptical. And when I told my friend that, yeah, and then she said, "Maggie, Maggie, what are you doing here?" My friend said, well, her mother's name was Margaret, but I can't imagine she'd call her mother Maggie. It turned out she did. It was evidence, is what I'm trying to get at. It was evidence of, I had one of these non-physical experiences in which I encountered someone that supposedly did, and they gave me a name of someone I had no way of knowing, and the name turned out to be right, and something about that scared me. And I just sort of tried to forget it. Ah, lucky guess. Forget it. Lucky guess. Some of the other ways people are stuck. I got an email from a guy who said, "My dad died. Would you check on him?" So I went to check on him. The story that unfolded was his dad had gone into the hospital with some disease in the process of killing him. But he'd gone in with the attitude, "I'm going to beat this. I don't care what the doctors say. I'm going to beat this. I'm going to get well, and I'm going to go home." That was his attitude when he went into the hospital. Probably, I don't know how long afterwards, but at some point he decided, nope, the doctors are right. This is going to kill me. I'm going to give up, and I'm just waiting to die. Well, he died in his sleep. And when he woke up dead, he didn't know it. As far as he knew, he was still waiting to die. So it got him stuck. He was in a space where, as far as he was concerned, he was just waiting to die. And it didn't matter that people came non-physically to try to talk to him. He just figured, nah, these people are just trying to be nice to a dying man. Leave me alone. One other before I move on. It's just amazing how time flies. Oh. I haven't seen your card yet, but I know it's coming. One more quick story. Another way you can get stuck. A woman named Mai calls me on the telephone and says, "A friend of mine died about 1.5 years ago, and I can still feel him around the house. I know he's still around the house. I know he's still visiting me. I'm not afraid of that. It just seems like after 1.5 years, maybe he ought to be going somewhere else. Maybe there's something better for him to be doing." So I checked on him. And it turned out that he was a young Jewish man. He died in an explosion. It was a mess. And when I tried to get him to go with me, he said, "I can't leave. I haven't finished what I need to do. I need to atone." And as soon as he said that, he went off into this wailing, crying, screaming fit that he'd been in for a while, evidently, like 1.5 years. The story that unfolded was that this young man, a man in my second book, his name is, I can't say it, I'm from Minnesota, but Kilich. That's supposed to be Israeli-sounding voice, and it's not. Kilich. Kilich believed that what atonement meant was that he was supposed to remember the things he had done in his life that that within himself he knew were not right, were not good, that didn't really go along with his ethics. He was supposed to remember those things. And he thought atonement meant he was supposed to just grieve over it. And he was stuck for 1.5 years, remembering the things he had done in his life that he wasn't too proud of, and grieving over it. I got lucky with that one. It turned out, and you can read the story in the book, it turned out that there was someone I call a helper. You might call them angels, you can call them guides, whatever you want to call them. The non-physical world and this world are just filled with helpers. Helpers are people. The people, some of them lived here, most of them lived here. When they got over there, they thought, you know, I could be doing better things over here than I was doing over there. There's this helper. I thought his name was Ribby. I don't know Jewish stuff. Turned out he was really a rabbi, and Ribby is what you call a rabbi if you like him, I guess. Ribby had been hanging around Keelik for 1.5 years, trying to get his attention. And trying to, it's too long a story to go into, and I wish I could. I love to talk. Anyhow, Keelik got stuck because his beliefs said that he should be atoning, and he believed that atoning meant he was supposed to remember the things he had done and grieve over them, and he was stuck in that for a long time. Turned out Ribby set me straight. He said, kids today, they think they know what atonement means. They don't know what atonement means. Atonement means to forgive. You don't just stand here and go over and over and over and over. You gotta forgive. Anyway. So Lifeline taught me the training wheels. It taught me how to do this thing called retrieval. In the process of doing these retrievals, I started gathering evidence. I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm a rational thinker. I'm the kind of person who has to look at the design for something, a machine, that's going to cost about $12 million to build, and it's going to make all kinds of money for somebody if it works. But if some of what's in there is just in my imagination, it can't be real, it's not going to work. And I'm a rational thinker. So I'm constantly gathering evidence, which I continue to push aside. And in my workshop, I'll be talking about beliefs and identity and what that pushing aside is about. I continued gathering evidence. At some point, enough of it finally crashed down on me. My world crashed, and I decided, there is an afterlife. It's real. One of the ways that I've learned to explore this afterlife, I would describe as using your imagination as a sense. Using your imagination as a sense, just like sight, or just like hearing. That all of us, any of us, are capable of doing this. And if I could have the house lights down a little, please. That's just so it's easier for you to do in private. I'd like to take you through just a short little exercise. So put your things down if you need to sit comfortably. Find kind of a comfortable position to sit in. And this won't hurt a bit. For those of you who are comfortable doing it, I'd like you all just to close your eyes and relax. Just close your eyes. Take in a deep, slow breath. And as you let it out slowly, relax. Feel yourself relax. Feel yourself just relax into the chair. Take another deep breath in, slow, deep breath in. And as you let it out, relax. Breathe normally and feel yourself, a nice relaxed state. Feel yourself just comfortable, safe, and relaxed. One more deep breath in, slowly. Let it out and relax. And remember your pet. Just remember your pet. Another slow, deep breath in. Let it out slowly and relax. Another deep, slow breath in. Let it out slowly and relax. Remember your mother. Just remember your mother. When you'd like to, open your eyes and come on back. How many of you would say that when I said remember your pet, you saw something? See a show of hands. How many? And I'd like those of you in the front who can't see to turn around and see that other people are doing this too. Some of you might have seen something in color. Some of you might have seen something in black and white. Some of you might have seen something in kind of a fuzzy shades of gray. Some of you might have only had the feel of what your pet looked like. When I said, remember your mother, how many of you would say that you saw something? Okay, same thing. You might have seen it, you saw it in your mind's eye. What this little exercise is about is to get back to my original point. Exploring the afterlife is so easy, the hardest thing to do is believe you're doing it. What you've just experienced, however you saw your pet, or however you saw your mother, is exactly the way that I see when I'm exploring the afterlife. Exactly. You're using what I call your imagination as a sense of sight. When I write about, I saw the lady in the chair, didn't look like the lady in the chair here. It was a real fuzzy black and white image that was kind of hard to make out, but I could kind of tell what she looked like. Again, my point is, this step is easy. For any of you who are able to see something, you understand exactly what I mean in my books when I say, I saw the lady in the chair. Or Helix stepped out of that blackness where I couldn't see him because he said, no, I can't show you myself. He said, after I died, not even my mother could recognize him. And I know why, because when I went to check on him, one of the things I saw was how he died. It was a kiosk out in a plaza. And Helix and some of his buddies, it was their last day of national service. They walked into a town, they were going to take their equipment back to the base, turned in their military equipment, and they were back on their own. They're standing on the sidewalk. A bus goes by. There's a kiosk out in the center of the plaza that goes kaboom. And when it went kaboom, everybody standing near it was suddenly knocked down on the ground. And the Helix buddies tried to get him to stay where he was because they knew what sort of thing could happen. Helix ran out in the street. And he tried to help other people. And he was standing about 15 feet away when the next one went off. And he just disappeared in a red fog, just he was gone. These experiences carry emotional energy, you may have noticed. We'll talk a little bit about the afterlife environments I've explored. The first one, and these labels, the Focus 22, Focus 23, Focus 24, 5, and 6, Focus 27, these are just labels. When this Robert Monroe guy began to explore out of body and began to bump into people that he knew were dead, he began to sort of categorize layers of consciousness by the kinds of people he met there, by the frames of mind they were in, by the realities in which they were participating. Focus 22 is an area that really can't rightly be described an afterlife area. All my experience exploring this Focus 22 place is pretty chaotic, and the people who are there are really still physically alive. Some of those people may be dreaming, some of them may be in comas, some of them may be so drugged out they can't stand up, some of them may be, I guess you'd call it mental illness. There's some pretty strange people there, and it's a pretty chaotic place, and there's really not much to be learned there, except, boy, you can get some weird spaces out here, Bruce. Next area is an area called Focus 23. Focus 23 is inhabited by people like Gertrude Euphemia Weatherwax. You will never be able to forget that name. See? Helic was also in Focus 23. The man who was waiting to die after he was dead was in Focus 23. The woman who kept trying to get her husband's attention and couldn't understand, she was in Focus 23. It's an area of our consciousness in which the people who are there tend to be locked in a reality of their own making. It could be the man who's waiting to die. That's his reality. And he's in a place where everything that happens around him just supports that. He's completely isolated, and that's the key to this Focus 23 area. The people that I find in Focus 23 are isolated. They're completely alone. They may be able to have contact with and see and hear and understand at the physical level reality. They may be wandering around in your house, and you call them a ghost. But they're stuck in Focus 23 because while they can see into the physical world, they can't see anywhere beyond where they're at. Lots of ways to get stuck. There are lots of ways to get stuck. I could go on and on, but I just saw the card and I can't go on and on. The next area to talk about is an area called the belief system territories. The focus level names are 24, 25, and 26. This is an interesting area. People there are stuck too, but not in the same way. In my explorations of this Focus 25 area, this belief system territories, it's an area where everyone who shares the same belief system sort of gathers together. You could conceptualize it as there's sort of a place where all the Catholics are, and there's a place where all the Hebrews are, various sects. There's even a place where the Lutherans are. Along with other belief systems. In my books, I've written about a fellow named Max, who was in a place called Max's Hell. It turns out the hells that I've explored are in this belief system area. Max in his physical lifetime was a psychologist. He was a shrink, and he was pretty good. But Max had this other side to him. Max was what you'd call an emotional sadist. Max is the kind of guy that he was a shrink, and at a house party, he'd walk up and talk with you, and in some way find out the things you were really afraid of. He's a shrink, it's okay to talk to him. He'd find out the things that you really didn't want anyone else to know. And in some other house party, he'd be talking to other people. I'll give you an example of the sort of thing Max would do. Let's say that you're a mayor of a city, and you're a homosexual, and your constituency doesn't know that, and you don't want them to know that, and you're really afraid that someone's going to find out and spread it to the rest of the people in town, you're not going to be elected again. It's your fear. And Max finds this out. And let's say that in one of those other house parties, Max comes across a local newspaper reporter who's absolutely convinced that gays are running this world into the dungeon, that gays are the reason so many things are wrong in this country, and that there must be some of them in government somewhere, and those are the ones who are really leading us down the path. Max would see to it that at a future house party, the mayor and the reporter would meet. And before they met, Max would just sort of, in side comments, say something to each of them that would sort of stimulate their fear. And he would make sure that he was standing in a position where he could see when you two met and watch. Max loved the fireworks. Like I said, he's an emotional sadist. And he was good at it. And he died. And he went to this place I'll call Max's Hell. Most of the hells I've visited and explored have this one similarity. Every man, woman, and child in the place shares the same belief system. Max's belief system was a belief in emotional sadism as a way to really have a good time. Throughout his life, Max sort of magnetized himself to that energetic. And when Max died, he went into a place where everybody there is exactly like Max. They're all free to do everything they like to do to make other people suffer. And so I got to watch a little restaurant scene where Max is sitting back in a sort of a secluded spot, and he's watching two men at a table that he's set up. And he's just getting a kick out of this, watching to the point where they're up punching each other. In the very next scene, someone else is sitting where Max was, and now Max is sitting at the table across from somebody, and he's been set up. Max's hell is a place that looks just like this to Max. It's got houses and cars and trees and all the rest. The only difference is everybody there is just like he is. It's not really punishment being in hell, from what I've discovered. It's more just, well, that's the way you believe you should be living. If that's how you really enjoy your life, come on in and enjoy it to the fullest until you get sick of it. In my workshop, I'll be talking about something called a back door out of hell, which is from other explorations in the hells of Focus 25. There are also heavens there, although the people that I was touring with, I always get these tour guides. And in fact, in exploring the hells, this was done during a period of time when I was gathering material for my fourth book without really knowing I was doing that. A friend of mine called and said, how about if we do some partnered exploring together? And I said, sure. Partnered exploring is a technique in which my friend who was living in Reno, Nevada at the time, and I, who am living here in Denver at the time, would non-physically meet with a list of questions, and at our non-physical meeting point, hook up with a helper who would then guide us off to somebody who had the answers to the questions we had. And we would interview that person either together or separately, and we had to learn how to do that just because we kept stepping on each other. And we would come back, write down everything we could remember about the experience, and then email back and forth to compare notes. Partner exploring, it's a wonderful technique. We also encountered these hollow heavens, and I'll have to talk more about those later. Because I want to talk about this other place that I've discovered, this place called Focus 27. Focus 27 is just a label. It's a label for a layer of consciousness that when I've explored it, what I have found is that the people who live there, most of them have lived here, maybe all of them, I don't know, I haven't met them all yet. The people who live there live by a particular rule, and it's not a rule that someone there said, hey, before you get in you have to observe this rule, and while you're here you have to observe this rule. It's just the way these people are. Just like the people who are stuck in Focus 23 are living in their own reality made by themselves. The people in this belief system territories area are living in a reality that best fits with what their beliefs are. In Focus 27, the only rule I found is that no one there will willingly impose their will or beliefs on anybody else. Everyone there lives pretty much in free association with everyone else, and the only rule is, and it's not a rule like enforced, it's more like the kind of person you are, evidently, that sort of leads to being there. You won't impose your will or your beliefs on anybody else. It leaves you free to explore all sorts of places. I'd like to talk about some of those places. One of those places is called a reception center. The reception center is a place in Focus 27 where new goners, people who've died recently, and that could be 4,000 years ago or yesterday or this afternoon, depending on when they realized they were dead. The reception center is a place that there are helpers who are there to sort of bring a person in and make them comfortable in their new environment, sort of introduce them to their new life. The reception center can be made to look like any environment that will do that. There's one big reception center I've visited a number of times, but there's sort of these little alcoves It's a local theater here in Denver that called me a couple years ago and said, we got your name from a bookstore, and they said you might be able to do something about a ghost in our theater. Some people have reported that someone's tried to push them down the stairs. Nobody can see whoever this is, but could you come over and take a look? I normally do this stuff non-physically, and I thought, hey, it's in town, I'll go look. Well, it turned out that the ghost was a man who had worked at the theater, and his everyday job was he would get up in the morning and open a fresh bottle of, I don't know, some kind of alcohol and start drinking it. And when it was time to go to work, he'd get to the theater to run the projectors. And he always had a bottle stashed somewhere so he could continue to drink, and when he got done with work, he'd go home and drink himself to sleep, and then he got up the next day and did the same thing. Well, when he died, he kind of liked the theater. There were some energies there he liked. And so he hung around, and it turned out that a physically living person there was able to sense his presence, and they got into some kind of connection that caused these weird things to happen. My point is these alcoves, these little places. So here I am trying to get this guy to leave the theater. And I'm using some of my more tactful approaches, and nothing is working. As far as he's concerned, he likes it there. Until some helper, I would have to say, whispered in my ear, but that would imply that I actually heard the person say, why don't you try this, Bruce, when I didn't. It was just, oh, I know what I'll try. And I said, tell you what, I know where there's a bar that I can take you to that serves nothing smaller than a double, and they're all free. And he looked at me, and he said, really? And I said, yeah, and I can take you there. Let's go, he says. So I got a hold of him, and off we went, and sure enough, when we landed in the reception center in Focus 27, we landed in a neighborhood bar, long, narrow building, long bar, someone standing behind the bar, you know, with a classic wiping out the glass, who just sort of winks at me like, okay, Bruce, we get him at the bar, we got him, just get him over here. We land, and I can tell it's taken this guy a little bit to sort of get his bearings, and as soon as he realizes he's in the bar, he makes a beeline for the bartender, and the bartender pulls out this great big bottle and just pours him a double, says, yeah, I'm glad to see you here. Helpers will do anything to make it easier for someone to fit in their new life. For that guy, what it took was a bar. And it worked. Reception center is an interesting place in that sometimes people who arrive there are sort of given a little bit of shock treatment. I don't mean electrically, I mean someone might say to them, you're dead, but they do it in a really interesting way. One of my visits, I'm standing sort of at the steps of this place. It's a reception center. And I can see in the crowd of people who've just recently died who are walking up to the reception center, this guy looks like he's maybe in like 57. I would have said old, but I'm getting close to that age. He's dressed in tennis outfit. He's got a racket in his hand. Looks obvious to me he probably died of a heart attack on a tennis court. And there's a helper standing over to the side, and I go over and say, hey, I want to kind of watch and see how this is done. Is it okay? And the helper said, yeah, just remain invisible. Don't scare this guy. Okay. So there's a helper standing there, also dressed up in a tennis outfit with a racket, who gets this tennis player's attention. Now, the guy who's greeting him is a helper. And he said, glad to see you. He said, I've been waiting to play for a long time. Come on, let's go find a court. Almost lost the word. They go over to a tennis court that looks like a pool table. It is absolutely perfectly flat. There isn't a crack, a blade of grass, nothing. The nets are perfect. And the helper just kind of volleys back and forth with the old guy for a little bit, and then he says, okay, it's time for us to start playing. But I want you to understand, I have a serve no one has ever returned. Well, this old guy he's played young bucks before, and he knows he's a pretty smart tennis player. By the helper saying, I've got a serve no one can return, the old guy's attention kind of brightened up a little bit. You could see it. You could see he was beginning to focus his awareness on what was going on around him. All the groggy that he came with was leaving. And he gets set and he's ready. He's going to return this kid's serve. And the guy who served the ball threw it up, and if a racket could move like 12,000 miles an hour, his did. But the ball came off about that fast. And it's floating toward the net. And it just gets to the net and disappeared. And the old guy with the racket goes, "Where'd it go?" He says, "Hey, I'll show it to you again." And the kid winds up, wham! And it looks like it ought to be coming 600 miles an hour, but it's still just floating through the air about that fast to the net. When it gets to the net, it just disappeared. The guy's looking around, and the helper says, "You got me. It's a trick. Let me tell you the trick." And at that point, he went over and introduced the man to the fact that where he was living now, these kinds of things could happen, that thoughts are things, and went off into a long discussion with him to introduce him to the fact that he was no longer in the physical world. In a gentle way, much more gently than I would have. There are other places there. There's a place called the Health and Rejuvenation Center I've done some exploring in. Some people, like the Alzheimer's lady, in her death carried the habit of that disorganized thinking into her afterlife experience. There's a place I've explored called the Health and Rejuvenation Center, and it looks a lot like a hospital in some of its places. And it's a place where helpers are there specifically to help people. You could say heal, or you could say forget, or you could say understand. There's lots of ways to say this. In the case of the man I talked about earlier who died in his sleep, was waiting to die, it was before I knew this Health and Rejuvenation Center was around, but when I went to check on him, he was laying in a hospital bed with a woman sitting next to him I knew to be his mother. And when I approached him, he was asleep, and I, in my usual tactless way, called his name several times, so he finally sat up with that look on his face and sound in his voice like, "I don't know who you are, but I am sleeping, and get out of my room." He was in this Health and Rejuvenation Center. And with repeated trips, what I got to see was, for a while, he continued to believe he was just a dying man waiting to die. And it didn't matter that it was his mother who'd been dead for years next to him. Every time he would wake up, she'd talk to him. She never directly confronted his belief about waiting to die, but she would talk to him about, maybe it'll get better, maybe something will happen. I got to watch the process where he began to be awake more and more often. He began to hear his mother's message that maybe it'll get better. Until one day when he woke up, he changed his mind. And he said to himself, "I don't know how it happened. It must have happened while I was asleep. The doctors must have found something they could do, and I am getting better. I can feel I'm getting stronger. I am going to beat this thing, and I'm going to leave this hospital, and I'm going to go home and recuperate, and I'm going to be fine." Still didn't realize he was dead. But it's exactly the sort of way these people in the Health and Rejuvenation Center work. All that was necessary was for this man to change his mind from a frame of mind of waiting to die to a frame of mind of, "I'm going to get better." And they just continued to support his beliefs about how long it would take for him to get better and the sort of physical therapies he would go through and all that stuff. Until the last time I saw him, he was walking around his room. There was no one else there. And he was wearing a robe over one of those things that's always open in the back. We had one in the front, too. He's in his slippers, and he had realized that something wasn't quite right. That he was going home, but it wasn't really to the home he thought. I assume at some point after that, he realized he was home. Where are we time-wise? Say again? 7 minutes. Yeah. The last thing I want to do before we have some time for questions, and I hope I get through this, is in one of my explorations, I came across, it was a partnered explorer with my friend from Reno, something that I've realized or decided is a sort of a creation story, and I want to pass it along. We were exploring the evolution of consciousness, and we were exploring my greater self and what that greater self was connected to. And that, whatever that was, its greater self. We were working our way back through greater selves, for lack of a better way to say it, in 5 seconds or less. And we got sort of back to a level of greater selves that when I asked the questions I had, I'd ask my question, and it felt like I turned into air, and it felt like the sweetest, most loving fog just sort of drifted through me. And as it did, I completely lost I lost it. I couldn't remember I'd asked a question. I couldn't remember what the question was. I didn't even know I couldn't remember that until that passed through. I said, wait a minute. I asked a question. This is my question. Same thing. This just incredibly loving something goes through me. I completely lose track of what I'm doing until it passes through. I eventually realize it's communication. And one of the questions we asked was, how did this get started? How did all these realities that physical people know about and us others know about, how did this get started? And the answer that I got in these waves of being totally blown away went like this. A long time ago, before there was time, a long time ago, but before there was time, in a place long before there were places, there was this self-aware consciousness. You could think of it as a ball of light. The self-aware consciousness was completely surrounded in a thick, impenetrable unknown. And it wanted to know what was out there in that unknown. And it spent some time, before there was time, thinking about how to do this. What it came up with was it took parts of itself and sort of put them together, added some glue, and would try to launch them into the unknown. And most often what happened was, right about there, it would just go break up. Take some more of itself, put it together, trying to fashion a self-aware being, trying to find something to hold that awareness together and launch it. And sometimes it would get a little further away before it all came apart, and eventually one of these parts, combinations of parts of itself bound together with something, disappeared into the unknown. And it said, well, it worked. But it doesn't seem to be coming back. So it continued running its experiments until one day, before there were days, it came back. Came flying out of the unknown and popped back into this original consciousness. And when it did, it brought everything it encountered in the unknown into the awareness of that self-aware being. And the self-aware being thought, wow, one of them worked. What did I use? Went back through all of its, its notebooks, checking all of its experiments, grab that thing, look at its number. I should have known. I should have known. When I fashioned that one, I used pure unconditional love as the binder to hold that consciousness together. That's why the other ones blew up. I didn't use that. And as I tried to form a self-aware being to probe the unknown and learn, as soon as I let go of it, some parts of that self didn't like each other. And there was nothing to hold them together. They just flew apart. But the one that I used, that unconditional love stuff, that one loved all of itself. Every part of itself. And that love made sure that it held itself together. All of its conscious parts were held in one place. And when it was launched into the unknown, now I understand why it came back. It knew there was a missing part of itself. It knew that I existed, this ball said to itself. And it was searching in the unknown, trying to find its missing part. And eventually, sort of got a whiff of me and popped back in. It's a creation story. And what it says to me is, everything there is came from that, including what looks like me standing here, although I understand there's more of me than what you see. and that our very consciousness is held together by the energy of pure unconditional love. And then being able to accept every part of ourself. We're here to explore the great unknown. And as we do that, everything we learn about the great unknown comes back into that ever-growing consciousness. And I'm just about out of time, so it's time for questions. Does anybody have a question? There's one. I can't hear you yet, though. Go ahead.
I have two questions.
The mic works now.
One, do you think that those dead people that you've talked to and met feel better now after the encounter with you?
In general, yes. Yes.
Okay, and second question to you is your language. Is there such focus as animal kingdom?
Yes? Are you asking if animals have an afterlife?
No, I'm talking about reincarnation
Reincarnation? Mm-hmm.
as an animal.
As an animal?
Mm-hmm.
I've not had any direct experience with that. As far as I know, from my own experience and memory, I've always been incarnating as a human. Doesn't mean it couldn't be some other way, but that's all I know.
But you haven't met anybody who is able to access this type of experience? Who's,
Not yet.
okay. Thank you.
Sure.
If you get stuck in the spiritual because of what you do in the physical, then why is it so difficult for them on the other side be getting
For a
the
helper
person
to-
unstuck? Yeah, I sort of understand that what you said, that it's easier for the people in the physical to get them unstuck than it is on the other side.
Yes,
So
and
why?
my time is up, but I'm going to do this real quick. Just like for you, a ghost in this room is invisible, that ghost exists at a layer of consciousness in which you aren't focused. For a person who's stuck, their consciousness is still focused in the physical world, primarily. And because their focus of attention is at the level of physical reality, for them, helpers are like ghosts to us. For people who are stuck there, they can't see the helper or hear the helper because the helper is like a ghost to them. As a physically living person, I'm focused in physical reality, and it means I have an easier time of reaching them. And since I have to leave, if you want to continue or anyone else has a question, I'll be available afterwards.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Hello. Hello. Thank you very much, Bruce. Now I'm going to ask you to cooperate with me a little bit here so we can make up a little bit of time so you have more time at dinner time. So if you will stand, this mic doesn't sound, am I coming through at all? Oh, okay. Well, you stand and stretch, but don't move. Don't move out, please, unless you really have to. While Karen McCoy is being hooked up, let's go right on so we have more time during the dinner hour. So while we unhook Bruce, thank you very much, Bruce. Where is Karen McCoy? Because we're a little behind here and we want to give you